marks this as a turning point. The time when his father left was extremely traumatic for him. His father abandoned the family and never returned. And his two older brothers left very shortly thereafter because they were already grown, so it was just him and his mother. And his mother was not a very, let's say, normal kind of mother. She was extremely overbearing and needy and kind of, I don't know, I would say not well. She used to engage him in these fantasies of hers, basically. She would make him and her together, like, decorate all the 36 rooms in preparations for guests that were never coming. They didn't really get guests. And by the way, once the father left, they had financial hardship. Even though they lived in this ginormous house, they were poor. And she used to take Armin outside and make him set up like a horse and carriage scenario and pretend that, they were going on a horse and carriage ride. They did have a horse, though, I believe. But it was that kind of a country home, where you could have animals and that sort of thing. So, Armin became an extremely lonely boy. He wasn't good at interacting with others, and he didn't have many friends. So, he created an imaginary friend slash little brother for himself, named Frankie. They spell it F-R-E-N-K-Y, Frankie. He was aware that Frankie didn't really exist. He was imaginary. And Armin knew that, but he was very overly involved with Frankie. And when he got into his adolescence, Frankie was no longer this brotherly figure, but instead he turned into an object of sexual desire. And for whatever reason, Armin felt the desire to eat Frankie so as to become closer to him, or to always have him with him. And from that, he developed a fantasy to do this with a real male. Now, Armin did date a couple of girls. It wasn't often that he got a date, but when he did, his mother insisted on accompanying them, because that was the type of mother that she was. Imagine that, if he was born in 1961, figure this was in, say, the late 70s that he was maybe dating, and it's not like the 1300s when you would take a chaperone, you know what I mean? It would be extremely odd to bring was just a normal guy. His fantasies, his obsessions seemed to quiet down a lot during that time. And that was probably because he was very busy, he was very involved with people, and he wasn't lonely. So he was really doing pretty well. But ultimately, around age 30, he left the military and went back to civilian life. He moved back in with his mother, who was, getting up there in years, and she had had a car accident of some kind and really needed assistance. So he began working as a computer repair technician and taking care of his mother in their giant house. And he explained that she was constantly needing something from him, constantly. Can you get me some tea? Can you get me some toast? Can you do this? Can you do that? Very, very needy. And after a few years, she passed away of a heart attack. And I guess it was kind of like a relief for him, because now he was on his own, nobody to answer to, and he could indulge his fantasies. So he built a slaughter room in one of the many rooms of the house. And he started exploring the internet. He came to find that there were other people like him. And this was around the year 2000, I believe. There were chat rooms where other cannibals would go to discuss their desires, their fantasies, and how to go about doing the deed, so to speak. How to prepare the meat he was 5 years old, his mother had committed suicide. So he was left to be raised by his father. And when he came out to his father as gay, that was the end of their relationship. And he was a very depressed man whose one desire was to be eaten, specifically his, how do I say this, male part. He wanted Armin to bite it off, and then he wanted the two of them to eat it together while he was still alive. But ultimately he would die from this injury, and then he wanted Armin to consume the rest of him. So, even though that wasn't exactly how Armin wanted to do it, he had no interest in that biting off part of it. But that is what Brandis wanted, so he agreed. Now, Brandis had a boyfriend, a partner, Brandis tried to get up out of the bed and he collapsed on the floor, at which point Armin came back in. And he found that Brandis really wasn't conscious, but he was still alive. And this was just dragging on and on. Now the tape recorder was still taping, or the video camera was still recording. So you could see on the recording, he prayed and he kissed Brandis and he hesitated and he prayed some more and he kissed him again and he waited another moment and he asked God to forgive him. And then he took the knife and he slit Brandis's throat. Then he took the body, did what he had to do, froze most of it, and prepared himself a meal. For this first meal, he used his best dishes. He opened a nice bottle of red wine, and he served the meat with what he called princess potatoes and Brussels sprouts. And he enjoyed it, and it was basically the experience that he hoped it would be. That eating this meat allowed him to keep Brandis with him. And he continued to take meat from the freezer regularly. It said that he had ingested a total of 30 kilograms. I don't know how they know that because it was gone, but he had ingested 30 kilograms of this meat before getting caught. But I'm ahead of myself now. So, after a little while, he wanted to do it again, so he went back onto these sites, and he was pretty free about telling people what he had done. And he put out another ad for somebody to volunteer to be his next victim. And an Austrian man responded to the ad, and when he heard that Armin had done this to somebody already, he reported him to the police. When the police searched Armin's house, they found the rest of the meat that was in a big, deep chest freezer. There was a false bottom in it, so that when you first opened it, you'd see his regular, foods in there, but if you went to the bottom, there was another bottom, with the human meat. And they found the video recording. With that video recording, there's just nothing you could say, there's no way of saying that he didn't do this, It was all there. And now I should mention that Brandis's boyfriend had filed a specific law against cannibalism, which doesn't mean that it is allowed. No, it is not allowed, but they don't have a specific charge for that. So he was charged with manslaughter, and he got 8.5 years in prison, and that was in January of 2004. And they had gone kind of easy, I would say, on him, because when they looked at the case, they saw that the guy, Bernd, had asked to be killed, and there was no force, and, all this kind of thing. So that's how that went. But after that ruling, Germany decided that they wanted to retry him with the charge of murder rather than manslaughter. Now, I don't feel like you can do that in this country, but I'm not sure. I think that if you are given a charge, you're convicted of manslaughter, the state can't decide that they want to give you something worse and retry you. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's what I believe. But anyway, they could do that here, and so in May of 2005, he was convicted of murder and given a life sentence with no chance for parole. And they stated that the reason that they could give him this murder charge was that, you could see from the recording that he slit the guy's throat when the guy was still alive, and they believed that his motivation was sexual pleasure. So basically, that is the end of the case. So, what do you think? I mean, it's a crazy, crazy case. After all is said and done, Armin states that he shouldn't have done it. He is remorseful. He has become a vegetarian. He said that he believes there are 800 cannibals in Germany, and that he thinks they should get help before what happened to him happens to them. Do we think that he's a danger? Do we think that if he got out of prison that he would do it again? Should he have a life sentence? I mean, I don't know. It certainly is very taboo. You don't hear about this sort of thing very often. It is just very, very sick. I understand people have fetishes and all that, but he actually felt the need to do it in real life. I had said it was windy, but it's raining also now. Now, I think it obviously.